I hit record. All right. Gladys, tell anybody that's listening a little bit about where you are with your writing and with this book in particular.
Well, I started writing about 6 years ago and
Nice.
started writing mainly personal essays. And then about a year into it, I got an idea for a book.
Nice.
And I did the first draft during Nano in 2018.
Okay. Yeah,
And
you and I are both late bloomers. We both started like
I
late
am,
in.
yes, I
Yeah.
am. I mean, I've been a reader my entire life,
Hmm.
but was never much of a writer from a fiction standpoint. I've
Yeah.
done academic writing and all kinds, but nothing like that. And so I'm still revising the book and I'm really ready to get it finished and out in the world and on to the next one because I've already now, once ideas started coming, they don't stop.
Okay.
I've got more ideas than I can get to.
So this is the book we're working on today is written and you're editing, or is this a future
Yes.
book?
This is the one I'm now.
Okay. How can I most, you sent me the character sketches. How can I most help you today? Like what is the next step you need for editing?
I'm really trying to get very clear on actually who the characters are and their relationships with each other
Okay.
because in going through it, I'm finding there are some characters I've written and they're different in different scenes, and it's not any kind of growth or arc or anything. It's one time they're very passive, and the next time they're very aggressive, and it makes no sense.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
I just need to get real clear.
I think I'm gonna pull up a slide from a conference I did recently that we can talk through. Um
Okay.
while I'm doing that, let me tell you why I'm gonna do that. I think part of the issue is you have great background. We're missing some grounding personality
Okay.
and we're missing a wound. And so this is a great place to come in this with, because if we can get that stuff, now that you have a draft, if we can get that
Hmm.
stuff with your key characters, it's gonna really land well with your it's really gonna empower you to edit well. Because you'll know
Okay.
exactly what you're
Okay.
looking for. So
Yeah.
um why can I not find this? Sorry. This is terrible. Everybody who's listening, just hold on while Jeff digs through his stuff. No. Come on now. There we go. So this is from the most recent masterclass that I taught. Um, and I want to give you some theory before we get into
Okay.
um what I'm looking for. So just so you understand why I'm talking about what I'm talking about. Uh, so let me share my screen. Um, so you've seen me talk about the dialogue Daisy before?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is what you sent me, and it's great. It's a character sketch of all the characters. Let me zoom out a little bit because that's so close, it's not helpful. Um, you have like really great background. And I would say everything you sent me is background. So she's a
Okay.
PhD student in art history. She's in her mid 30s. She's recently returned to school after taking a break from following a painful divorce and the death of her parents in an auto accident. Um, that's kind of your opening sentence about who your character is. So if I look at like the different components of our characters, um, you know, you're giving me her age, which is kind of her background. You're telling me her interests, which come into her background. You're telling me that she
Okay.
came through a painful divorce and her parents were in an auto accident. Those are kind of what I would call character formative moments.
Hmm.
So they all
Yeah.
live, all of this first paragraph or that first sentence lives down here in like the background of here's what happened before the story. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
So you go on to say she's in Beverly, England to research her dissertation on the medieval minstrel carvings in Beverly Minster. Oh, I cannot speak. She's smart and curious. Now here, she's smart and curious. You give me two lines that I would say drift up into personality and worldview.
Okay.
She's smart and she's curious, or like two adjectives I can use to describe how she operates in the world. That's not background. That's not things that happened in the past. That's actually how
Right.
she operates in the world. That's something we can start to build a character voice out of.
Okay.
Um, she's good with crosswords and other puzzles, so she's a puzzler. That's something else. That's another piece that I can like start to build a character voice on. And her best drink of choice is gin and tonic. Again, that's background. That doesn't tell me about anything about it. Now, the reason I say that that's all background, let's take this sentence about how she's after taking a break for following a painful divorce and the death of her parents in an auto accident. So if we move back to the character, kind of how characters work, we've got the character background. From that stems the character's personality and worldview, like how they navigate in the world. And then from that, we get the character's voice. She had a painful divorce. That's something that happened to her. Her personality is who she is because of that. She had a painful divorce, so she's jaded. She had a painful divorce, so she struggles to trust. She had a painful divorce, so she's looking for love. She had a painful divorce, so she's excited about moving on to the next step of her journey. Can you start to feel the tension and how like that line, she had a painful divorce? Part of the reason I think that part of what we need to do before you start editing, and part of the reason I think you're like, I don't know how my characters respond to things, is there's like 10 ways you can respond from a painful divorce.
Right.
And so we got to ground that kind of information for your characters to build their personality before we can start talking about their voice and physical expression and how they're actually designed on the page. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes.
Part of the reason that's important is this is how the reader experiences your character. If we've got these four elements of your character, we've got your character's background, we've got your character's personality and worldview, and then we've got your character's physical expression and your character's voice. The reader interacts with your character in this order. Character voice is first, right? Every time your character's on the page, we're going to feel their voice. We're going to feel how they interact with other people. We're going to feel the word choices they use. We're going to feel their body language. All that's character voice. At some point, likely early in the novel, you're going to give us the character's physical expression. That's another way we're going to understand who the character is by how they look and how they choose to um, uh, display their identity in the world. So if Sarah came through a painful divorce and the death of her parents, if part of what she's struggling with, part of her personality is depression, she's going to dress one way.
Okay.
If she's rebounding from this painful time in history, she's ready to move on, she's going to dress and sound a completely different way.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we
Yes,
got
it
to
does.
ground who she is to bring out this to before we can start getting into her physical expression and character voice for editing. Um, the next thing, the reader hears the backstory. So at some point, Sarah will likely tell somebody, I just got out of a really painful divorce. And that's how we'll know that. Or the narrator will say, Sarah does this because she just got out of a really painful divorce. And that's how we learn the backstory. You almost never tell the reader the personality, which is why we skip it so often when we're planning,
Okay.
right? Because we
Yeah.
know I need to know the backstory. I'm gonna have to tell that to the character. We know I'm gonna have to describe how she looks, or I'm at least gonna I might put her on the cover. So like people know how she's gonna appear. We kind of forget about character voice. We just hope it happens. And then we skip personality because it's something we never say. Like if you write, Sarah was smart and curious, an editor is immediately going to outline it and be like, show me, don't tell me. Right. Like, so
Right. Right.
And what they mean by show me, don't tell me is show me in the character voice.
Mhm.
Um, so you get the theory behind what we're going to do.
Yeah. Yes.
So we're going to take the backstory that you've written and we're going to build out these personality traits. And we're specifically going to focus on for characters that are major parts of your story arc.
Okay.
We're gonna build out a wound that they're healing from.
Okay.
What is it about them that is going to change from this story to the next story? Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yes.
Okay, great. I'm excited. Uh, my goal is that once we empower you with those things, we can build a character voice. And that way, when you go to edit a page, you're like, I know how Sarah's supposed to sound and how she's supposed to feel to the reader. And how, because I know her personality deeply, how she's going to respond to specific emotional stimulus. And then you
Right.
can read the page and be like, is this who she's supposed to be? And you can
Right.
edit to line up. Okay,
Okay.
how many of these you've got? Sarah, Thaddeus, Walter, Christopher. How many of those main characters would you say the reader, how many of them get point of view?
All of them.
All of them get point of view.
All
Great.
of them get point of view.
What's the genre?
Adventure thriller.
Adventure thriller. Okay, so we got four. How big is that point of view? Are we talking like one scene or do we really drive in their eyes for a bit?
Sarah and Thaddeus get more. Walter
Okay.
and Christopher get several scenes, but it is less.
Okay. So we're going to mark Walter and Christopher off as kind of secondary characters. The
Yeah.
reason that's important is because your primary characters need to grow and change in
Right.
some way, right? Like that's what the reader's here for. They're here to see your primary characters like have this experience of growth and change. So
Okay.
we're going to need to see, we're going to spend most of our time with Sarah and Thaddeus, because if you can nail Sarah and Thaddeus, the reader will uh be in for the story. Does that make sense?
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's talk about Sarah. We gave the she's staying with Walter and Elizabeth at the beginning, and is beginning to think of them as a surrogate family. It's fantastic. She's going through it. She made a bad decision in her divorce, you say. And I'm just going through her background real quick before we get
Right.
into like what her wound is. Um, so she turned in somebody else's paper. I'm going to
Right.
freeze there because there's something in here. Because you're noting that she made a mistake. This is how we often find the character wound, where like in the past, she had this moment where she made this mistake. The follow through of that is so in this story, she has to not make that mistake again. Does that make sense?
Right. Yes.
So plagiarism was the mistake, but what we need for is why she plagiarized. So we'll get to that in 1 second.
Okay.
Um, her advisor discovered what happened. He offers to let Sarah turn in something else. Horrified and embarrassed, she runs away. So we have this complex kind of character flaw. My question is, she turned in something that wasn't hers. She gets caught, and then instead of fixing it, she runs away. How does, what does that say about her?
I always felt like it was where she could not trust herself to make a good decision. And that was why she thought, I can't trust myself, so I don't even need to stay in this program. I might do it again. So
Okay.
she's got to learn to trust herself.
Okay.
And she also feels like she has to prove her advisor always wanted her to stay and fix it and continue. And so now that she's come back, she feels like she has to earn her trust. She's hyper conscious of being sure she's doing her own work and not taking from anyone else. And
Perfect. Those
in
are
that.
great details. So hyper conscious about quality of her work, would you say?
Well, quality, and it's original. It's her thoughts and her research. It's not someone else's.
Okay.
So that
So
even doing academics, you may use someone else's thoughts, but you prove that you show where you get the ideas from and credit them.
gotcha. So would you say she's detail oriented?
Yes.
That's great. So detail oriented, and just so that you can do this on your own, right? Like, so
Mhm.
that, because we'll do a couple characters together and then I want you to be able to do this on your own. What I've done
Right.
is I've looked for the place where she needs to change. And you
Okay.
know it, right? Like all of this is in you as the author. You know all of
Right.
this.
Right.
So she needs to learn to trust herself and to not doubt her own work, right? Like that's what she's going to learn over the course of the story. Right now, she's hype. She doesn't trust herself and she doesn't um, like the things that she produces, right? Because she doesn't trust her
Yes.
own work. As a result of that wound, we have these personality traits. She's hyper conscious about the quality of her work. She's detail oriented. Um, she has ownership of her stuff, right?
Yes.
What else about her would you say that comes out of this lack of trust in herself?
She also has trouble knowing who else to trust.
Okay. So also struggles to trust others.
Right.
Okay.
And wants to know that they are trustworthy.
Okay. Needs to feel are trustworthy. Um, these are great. These are excellent descriptors. Let's talk about, you also have in here that she's smart. Talk to me about that. Book smart, socially smart. What does smart mean?
Book smart.
Okay.
And and
Yeah. Sorry,
that
keep
was
going.
what that was part of what led to her divorce, because her husband had a teaching position and got denied tenure and had
Gotcha.
to go find a job somewhere else. And she wanted to stay where she was to finish her degree, and he didn't like that.
Is she afraid that others are going to look down on her? How does she feel about her book smarts? Does she love that she's smart? Is she self-conscious that she's smart?
She's she's not self-conscious about it. um, she knows she's smart, but she doesn't hold that over anyone, like I'm better than you or anything like that. It's just
She doesn't hold it over everyone, but it sounds like she doesn't try to hide it either.
right. No, she
Okay.
doesn't.
Okay. How does she feel about her divorce? You're saying her husband was intimidated by her and left her because she wasn't, because she was, that I think I'm not using the word trope in a bad way. I'm using it in a good way. It's like an expected storyline. There's the trope of like the husband couldn't take the fact that the woman was so successful. How does she feel about that now when the story begins?
When the story begins, she's pretty much moved on from that.
Okay.
That that was part of what, at the time it was happening, she was upset and stressed and wasn't doing her own work.
Hmm.
And that was why she ended up she needed to turn in something to her advisor and didn't have anything and just grabbed something and turned it in.
Okay. Um, has her divorce impacted how she treats other people?
I think she has a little problem getting close to people.
Okay.
And if her parents were still alive, she probably would not be as close to the Stonemans as she's becoming.
Okay.
But because she's now alone, she had no siblings, so she's basically alone in the world. So
Gotcha.
when she finds somebody she trusts and feels comfortable with, and she starts
Okay.
developing a relationship.
Would you say she's super loyal after she finds somebody she trusts?
Yes.
Okay. Do you use the Enneagram?
No, I know about it, but I haven't done it yet.
You're writing a 6, by the way, if you want if you ever want to
Okay.
use it. Um, and it's a pretty stereotypical 6 in that she's also good with like puzzles and thinking things through.
Okay.
Um, that's great, by the way. What it means is that when somebody can look at your character and be like, this is the personality type on whatever personality chart you're writing, what that means,
Wow.
Gladys, is what they're saying to you is, hey, you've written a realistic character. This
Okay.
is somebody I can see existing in the real world. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so we have here now some adjectives that describe her personality based on her background, based on her, right? If we're going to go back to that dialogue Daisy, based on her genetics, her family history, her formative moments, her economic status, her place in culture. You didn't define all of those things. You've defined some of them, like you've talked about her place in culture. She's an intelligent woman with a PhD. Or she's a PhD, seeking a PhD. That defines her place in culture a little bit for the reader. Like the reader will know, like, oh, I can place her in modern culture in that way. You've
Mhm.
given us some formative moments, and you've given us a little bit of family history. That's really all we need. Like you can write a very
Okay.
complex personal Bible, but that's enough. All you
Okay.
need in background is enough to figure out the character wound. The wound for her is around trust, right? She doesn't
Yes.
trust herself. She doubts her own work, and she needs to learn to trust herself through the
Right.
book. So from that, we were able to develop 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 personality traits, which is great. That is too many to build a voice on.
Okay.
That's too much to be like, okay, so this is how she's going to sound. That's a lot. So what I want to do is I now want to take this voice and be like, what are the personality aspects that are most expressed in her character? And that's what we're going to use to build a voice on. So,
Okay.
you know, she's it tell me about the journey she goes on through the story, because we have the ability to look at it and go like, okay, this is written, we're editing, we can
Mhm.
pick the personality traits we really want to pull out of that's going to empower the plot in the most. So
Okay.
talk to me about the journey she goes on.
Well, the book opens when she's doing research and she finds this symbol carved on the back of a medieval carving.
Okay.
And the same time she finds out they've translated a friar's journal from the 14th century that references clues and what it leads to.
Okay.
So now she's got to find the clues and figure out how to read them and what they lead to and get to it. And along the way, she's going to have to work with other people because, of course, the bad guys also know and they're after her.
Gotcha. Okay. So from what you just said, we definitely need her to be curious,
Yes.
right? That's really important. That's key to her. Like she has to have something driving her to do this puzzle.
Okay.
So her curiosity is important. We also need her to be detail oriented in a way that's observant. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You're very much writing a Dan Brown type character who's like, I can't think of the symbiologist's name, but
Robert Langdon.
Robert Langdon. You're very much writing a Robert Langdon
Yeah.
character. These are now he doesn't have the same guarded trust issues that you're writing. But
Right.
the Robert Langdon character is this like detailed and observant and very curious. He sees things that other people don't see. And then his first reaction is, huh, I wonder what that is. Right. Like, so we
Right.
definitely want that from her. We also want her to come off as smart, and that's going to be important in the language she uses and the topics she talks about. But
Right.
another thing we really have to focus on is this guardedness of hers, because her wound, detail oriented, book smart, and curious, doesn't express her wound in her character voice.
Right. Yeah.
So we need her to be guarded in her character voice. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So let's talk about what she's going to look like on the page. I'm going to put in a 2 column, 5 row chart. Um, Aspects of a character voice, which are looking on the page, are the topics she talks about, the language she chooses to use, the body language she has, the construction of her vocalizations or her utterances. So that's like when she speaks, what does that look like?
Okay.
And uh her pacing, or how she participates in a conversation. Um any questions about any of those before we start building her voice together?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so this is the part where it's like, okay, now we're actually going to give you a practical tool for editing,
Okay.
so that when you look at the page, you're like, does her voice look this way? So topics she likes to talk about: she's book smart, she's curious, she's guarded, she's detail oriented. I'm going to add one more in here, that she is self-aware
Okay.
of others' perceptions. Part of the reason I'm adding that is because you have this character flaw if she doesn't trust herself and she doubts her own work, which means she's going to be aware of her own work. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so which of these 5 topics, language, body language, the construction of our utterances or pacing, which of those are like, well, I know how that one looks for you? Which of those is the strongest?
Probably topics.
Okay, talk to me about the topics she talks about.
Well, she talks about medieval art, the art history,
Okay,
um, because that's what she's studying. So she knows about that time period and the churches she's looking at and different things like that.
okay. So notice how I wrote that for the topics. I said she stays focused on the academic stuff.
Right.
Because when our characters making choices about the topics they choose, they're choosing like, am I staying in my comfort zone? Am I exploring? Am I a learner who's constantly exploring things I don't know? Am I super open and vulnerable all the time? And I'm talking about, I'm just confessing things all the time. Narcissists talk about themselves. So part of what we're talking about when we make these choices about their languages, it's not just what they're talking about, it's also what they're not talking about. Right.
Okay.
So by telling me that like she stays focused on the academic stuff, it means that she shies away. If I could spell, she shies away from personal conversation. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And that goes with she doesn't trust herself. She has trust issues, right? It goes with
Right.
her being guarded. Guarded people aren't going to just openly talk about themselves. You have to really earn their trust before they start to open up. It builds into her divorce, right? She's been wounded by somebody she trusts. So she's just going to keep it about the academic stuff from now on. Does that make sense?
Right. Yes.
So when you're going to edit a scene and she's meeting somebody for the first time, if she's suddenly spilling details about her divorce and her life, you've got to rewrite that scene,
Right.
because
Yeah.
that's not something she's going to do. Now, do you give your characters inner monologue? Do we get to see their thoughts?
A little bit, not a lot.
Okay. do those thoughts come in the form of a narrator, as in like, um Sarah knew that Sarah knew that what Walter wanted was for her to open up about um how she was feeling about her divorce this morning, but she just couldn't give that to him. Black
Oh,
coffee's
there's
fine.
not.
There's none of that.
No,
Okay.
there's not much. No,
Any inner thoughts in italics?
no.
Okay, great. So that helps me know, like, okay, so that's a tool you're not necessarily using a ton, which means we don't have to
Mhm.
plan for it. So that's good.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
you are going to have to add, you'll find yourself in here needing to add sentences or two from the character's perspective you're in about
Okay.
what's going on. I'm sorry, hold on 1 second. I have a crying child.
Uh-oh.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. My 8-year-old was screaming bloody murder upstairs, and I went up, and he was riding his bike and rode face first into a tree branch. So yeah,
Oh, oh,
this poor kid,
well.
Gladys. This is just weird detail you may not want to know, but he's a couple days ago, 3 days ago, he was at my mom's house, his grandmother's house, and he had been told to leave her treadmill alone. And he decided right before we leave, he's like, well, I'm going to do it real quick. I won't get in trouble. And he turned it on, and it was on full speed, and he
Oh
stepped on
no.
it, and he shot off the end of it. So he's
Oh,
already like cut up and bruised all over his whole body.
right. Yeah.
And then he just ran into this. I don't know if you can see it on my shirt, but now I have like a face covering on my shirt from like dirt. He ran headfirst into this branch. So now he's got gashes all over his body already. Now he's got another gash here and another gash here where you can see the branch just whacked him right in the head.
Right there. Oh
Yeah,
man.
he's okay though, because I was like, okay, we're gonna clean you up. Your brother's gonna clean you up. We're gonna get you all good. And then why don't you sit down and rest a little bit? He's like, no, can I go back outside and play more with my friends? I'm like, all right, you're fine.
You're fine.
Yeah,
Yeah, you'll live.
yeah. Anyway, sorry about that.
Okay.
So, we were talking about the topics she talks about. She stays focused on academic medieval architecture stuff, and she's going to shy away from personal conversations. And I was saying, so that if you're writing a scene and she starts like revealing it the start for with no rapport built, with no trust
Right.
developed,
Yeah.
she's just like, yeah, my husband left me because he's a jerk. Then like, okay, I need to edit this
Right.
because somebody's
Yes.
gonna really have to work her into talking about that. What else about her feels strong to you? In her language she uses, the body language she uses, how she constructs an utterance, or her pacing.
Um, well, the language she uses, because she's talking about a lot of what she researches anyway, and the people she talks to, a lot of them have knowledge of it.
Okay.
So, but she doesn't use, I don't have her using a lot of real technical terms because I want the reader to be able to
Yeah,
relate to her as
you don't want to
well.
make the reader feel
Right,
lost. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. um so I would say that she's going to use shorthand,
Okay,
but we have this like self-aware of others' perceptions, so you need her using shorthand and then explaining it.
okay,
Right, that'll demonstrate her self-consciousness a little bit. If she's
okay,
like, you know well, like in the Taylor paper, Taylor said blah 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 blah. Somebody who's
okay,
not self-conscious may just be like, well, like in the Taylor paper,
okay. Yeah,
and make somebody ask, what do you mean by the Taylor paper? And then she'll be like, well, but because she's self-conscious and she's aware of how other people understand what she's saying, you want her
yeah,
explaining things. Does that make sense?
yes.
Yeah. Which means the construction of her utterances is, when she speaks, she's going to give you longer sentences,
Okay,
um, and more sentences than she needs. to justify herself.
Oh, okay.
You want her a little defensive in explaining what she feels and believes, which means when we see her speak on a page, her individual utterances, like when she talks, you're looking for like 2 sentences or more, and you're going to have her one sentence is going to be like her statement, and then she's always going to follow it with self-justification.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, that does.
Yeah. Um, what kind of, when you watch her talking in your mind, what's she doing with her hands?
Um, she gestures some,
Okay.
not big gestures, but a lot of times I've got her where she's got a piece of paper or a computer, she's got something in her
Yeah.
hand.
Perfect. I'd also have her as part of her curiosity, she's going to touch things.
Okay.
Right, like that's something that curious people do. They walk up to things, they touch them, they play with them, they pick
Yeah.
things up they're not supposed to necessarily pick up, right? Like, and that's also a very Robert Langdon trait. He's constantly touching ancient paintings and things that people are like, don't touch
Yeah.
that, and he's like, yeah. So you want her touching. It's a way to demonstrate her curiosity.
Okay. Yeah.
Participating in convos, this one can be hard to figure out, but I would say you want her holding back until somebody
Okay.
calls her in.
Okay.
And part of that is we're trying to express that guardedness and that self-awareness. She's going to feel cautious when she talks. She's going to hold back a little bit.
Okay. Right.
Okay, so this is what we call her baseline voice, right? So when you're
Mhm.
writing a scene from her perspective and you're about to edit it, I would just glance through this real quick
Yeah.
and then read the scene, and lines where it doesn't line up, I'd probably highlight them first. I'd try to get the whole scene, because you're gonna, with every scene that you come to her with, you're gonna have a question of like, is this line that needs to change, or is this a scene that needs to be rewritten?
Okay.
Or there's going to be times, because she's a guarded character, there's going to be times where she's opening up too much, and you're going to be like,
Mhm.
oh, I need to get a scene of rapport building first, and then she can share this information later.
Okay.
Because characters' voices modulate, right? Like when we talk about
Mhm.
our dialogue Daisy, we have our core voice, the baseline expression of the voice. And then in different emotional circumstances, the character's voice is going to change. And that's how we demonstrate character growth, right? And character growth isn't a straight
Mhm.
line. It's not like, oh, now she's vulnerable, she's always vulnerable. We have moments of growth where we show change and then we pull back based on our emotional
Yeah.
state. So the emotional state you're moving toward is that guarded to more self-assured,
Okay.
right? So if we
Yeah.
look at her voice, and we can say like, here's the stuff that feels guarded, right? Shies away from personal information, feels guarded, right?
Mhm.
Uses shorthand and then explaining it is something that feels like, oh, this is a thing that we want to see modulate to show that she's not trusting herself, holds back until somebody calls her into a conversation. These are things that we're like, okay, these are the things we want to see modulate as she starts to trust the people she's working with. We're going to see these things change a little bit. So,
Okay.
you
Yeah.
know, you'll have scenes where once she feels comfortable, um, once she feels comfortable, or actually, let's write it this way. Sorry. Once she starts feeling comfortable, um, she'll shares personal details,
Okay. Yeah.
right? Can you feel how like if you write 4 scenes where she doesn't say anything personal, even though somebody's probing for it, and then in the 5th scene, she finally shares like, look, I'm sorry. The divorce was really rocky and I struggle to connect with
Yeah.
people. What a big moment for the reader that is. The reader's like,
Yes.
oh, finally. Like, here we go. We're opening up.
Right.
Right? Like, uses shorthand and then explains it, right?
Hmm.
Stops needing to explain.
Okay.
Now, again, it's not something that's going to happen in every scene. It's something that's going to happen in moments of vulnerability, moments of confidence, moments of change, where we're like, okay, now we're starting to feel like we know who Sarah is. Sarah's starting to find her footing. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Um, sorry, this is just so I can see it all on a single page. What am I doing? I forgot. That's what I want. Now we can start to kind of feel and see who she is a little bit. This holding back from conversation, you're going to want a moment in the story where, right, like demonstrate change by speaking up and taking charge of a conversation. Can you think
Yeah.
of moments in your book where she needs to like step up and show character change?
Yes. And I've got this is really helpful because I know some of the scenes and I've been trying to figure out exactly how to work them. And this is exactly what I needed.
Yeah, so you need to
So kind of
modulate
had,
that voice. Yeah.
yeah,
But
yeah,
the key is not to modulate too soon. So go back through your
right,
earlier scenes when you don't have big emotional change and make sure you're really nailing that baseline voice well.
yes,
Because nailing the baseline voice well will create that change the reader wants to see at the right moment. Does that make
mhm,
sense? Okay,
yes,
let's do Thaddeus and make sure you've got a diverse cast. Because if we don't have a diverse cast, if we do this chart for Thaddeus and it looks like her chart, then you have more editing to do than you want.
yeah,
Does that make sense?
yes,
Okay, so we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna take the background you've written, and then we're gonna play out one of the other questions before we get into that. We're gonna play out the core wound. We're gonna play out the personality. We're gonna play out the character voice. One of the questions I have for you before we get there, though, is how do they interact with each other? Are they good for each other, or are they a negative influence on each other?
they become good for each other.
They become good for each other. Okay.
Right.
Meaning at first they're not.
Well, at first, they she doesn't trust him,
Okay.
and he really doesn't care.
Okay.
Although he gets curious about what's going on. But as far as what she thinks and all that, he
Okay.
isn't. He's like, he can take it or leave it, but he gets drawn in by what she's looking for and the story behind it.
Okay. He's going to be an interesting character because he's both curious and apathetic. Um, that's not bad, by the way, to have contrasting personality traits. It just
Yeah,
means that, like, man, we've got to work those really well. And
right.
that's probably we're going to have to work a voice that there's going to be something that piques his curiosity.
Hmm.
He gets interested when
Yes.
X. Yeah. Um, so let's just keep that in mind as we go into his background and look for his personality. And that's good to know that at first they frustrate each other and then they start to help each other. Is this a love interest between the two of them?
Not in this book,
Okay.
and I'm not sure if they will ever get to that point, but they are both going to be in the whole series.
Okay. It
They'll be
is,
working together.
yeah, because of modern storytelling tropes, it's really tough to have um a male and female lead of similar ages and not have the reader doing a will they, won't they.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like, it's
Yes,
just
it does.
because of modern storytelling tropes, that's just
Right.
something readers do. They're like, will they, won't they? If you don't want them to, you need to give them both love interests that aren't each other.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's for future books. That's not for this book.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so he's an archaeologist fired from his university profession several years ago for stealing items found on a dig. So you can see, like, this is background, but I've highlighted it because there's definitely something about the wound in there.
Yes.
Nearing 50, he leaves private digs for wealthy clients, making a comfortable living. So this is again an interesting background note, but when we talk about how that's expressed in his personality, a character could hate himself for doing this. Oh, now I'm just a archaeological, tour guide. Or a
Right.
character can love themselves for doing this. Now I'm an archaeological tour guide and I have a private jet, right? Like, so we need to, this is a good detail, but we need more to develop a voice. Um,
Okay.
he misses teaching students, but not his academic colleagues who turn their back on him and never asking to hear his side of the story. That feels to me like there's some resentment there and there's some like
Mhm.
holding of grudges. Is that what you're going for?
Yes.
Okay. Um, So he holds grudges. This is good because it, creates distance between him and Sarah.
Sarah.
I want to make sure I said her name right. Him and Sarah. Uh, when asked to consult with Sarah and try to help her figure out the cup she might be searching for, he's initially reluctant to get involved with anyone in the academic world. Curiosity, however, wins out. Through the actions of the bad guys, he realizes what the cup is being sought and works with Sarah to find the remaining clues in order to figure out where the cup is hidden. So he's got this, he's stealing stuff on a dig, and now he's angry at his colleagues. Talk to me about that. What's going on there?
What had happened was he was married
Okay.
and his wife was sick, cancer or something, terminal. And so this guy approached him and said, "Hey, if you find something and will give it to me, this guy owned a pharmaceutical company. I will see that your wife gets these drugs."
Okay.
And so they did all that, and his wife still died. The drugs didn't save her, but it was found out that he had stolen them. But again, nobody ever really said what was going on. That's not like you. Why would you do something like that? Or a few people did, but not enough.
Gotcha. So you've got a character who did something wrong, but feels self justified in what he did.
Yes.
So you can kind of see how like that could go two ways. And this is why we break it down into personality, because he could do something wrong and feel terrible about it, but like I had to. That's the like Les Miserables, Jean Valjean. I stole a loaf of bread to feed my family. I know it was wrong. I'm ashamed that I had to do it, but I didn't have any other choice. What you're describing is a different type of character, which I actually think is more fun
Okay.
because it's a character who's morally gray and who's
Okay.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, I did it. But if you knew why I did it, you would have done it too. Does that make sense? Like,
Yes.
it doesn't sound like there's a lot of shame, because the shameful character like Jean Valjean, he looks at the Javert, who represents the law and the authorities, and he's like, no, 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 you just have to understand. And there's a core wound in there of like, I'm not the problem. I'm moral just like you. You just don't understand why this happened. That's
Yeah.
not the character you're writing. You're
Right.
writing a character that's like, you a-holes hold up your morality too much and you do bad crap too all the time.
Right.
You've just decided to judge me. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yes.
Okay. Is that who
Yes.
this character is?
Yes, it is.
Love it. That's an anti-hero character because they have negative traits that traditionally don't go into the like Captain America All-American superhero version. Sarah, and I like it because we're already separating the two characters. Sarah very much falls into the moral, self-doubting, humble character that we traditionally see as a hero. So the
Right.
anti-hero in what you're writing in Thaddeus is somebody who's like morally gray, right? Revels in
Mhm.
that moral gray and is a little cynical toward everybody else. Does
Yes.
that make sense? Okay.
Yes.
So I'm going to throw out some words. So when we talk about his core wound, how would you describe his like problem with how he sees the world? What about him needs to grow and change in order to succeed in the story?
To a certain extent, I think he needs to learn to trust people also.
Okay.
That because he doesn't trust a lot of people. He had a few people that talked to him through all this and remained friends, and those he trusts and would do anything for. But most people, he's kind of
Yeah,
isolated himself.
I get what you're saying. I'm going to push on that word trust though,
Okay.
because you're using it in two different ways. The way you're using it with Sarah is this sorry, I'm trying to define it without using the word itself. When you say trust with Sarah, you're like she needs to be open to connection with other people. She's guarded and
Right.
needs to be open to connection with other people. When you use it with Thaddeus, it's less about connecting with other people. It's less about protecting himself from other people, and it's more about um, allowing other people to be themselves. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yes,
And
that
the
does.
reason I'm pushing on these words for you, and I'm going to encourage you to push on words when you use them. Like, so when I'm doing this myself, and I'm looking at one of my characters, and I'll write the phrase like, he needs to learn to trust other people. If I've used that phrase with another character, I'm going to
Yeah.
stop and be like, wait, do these mean the same thing? Or do they mean
Yes.
different things? And here they mean different things. And so as we're fleshing out this character to like edit them, we need to be real clear about what they mean. Because what you do in this, like I'm building a template to edit with, is going to impact your whole book.
Okay.
So we want to make sure that we like using the right words here. So I'm just gonna express, and you can tell me if you like this or not, that his
Okay.
core wound is that he judges, isolates himself by judging others cynically. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Yes.
Does that kind of hit what you're going for with him?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So
Yes.
the basic growth arc for him is like stop being an asshole
Yeah.
to everyone,
Yeah.
right? He's going to have so now that we're talking about who he is, he's got this curiosity. When we were saying he's apathetic, it's less an I don't care and it's more an arrogance
Okay.
of I know you, right? Like I've got you in a box. That's how you want his character to come off, is this like when he meets Sarah, he needs to feel like I know this person, I know how they're going to react, I've weighed them, I've measured them, and I've already made my decision about them. And he
Okay.
needs to get
Yeah.
over his own like judging of other people and be
Okay.
open to whoever. Does that make sense?
Yes.
um so when we say like he needs to stop being an asshole to everybody, it's this like he needs to be open to learn from others.
Okay.
Um, how does that feel to you?
that actually feels pretty good because I think that's been part of what was missing with him,
Yeah.
and also in how he and Sarah interact.
Yeah.
Because I've got her, given his past, she does not trust him
Oh, no, no way.
at all.
Yeah.
So she's very standoffish and cynical, and I need to make him come in from his point of view of that also.
Yeah.
But they have to work together.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you're setting up I gotta say, this is a great partnership.
Mhm.
It reminds me a lot of, do you ever watch the old 80s movie, Jewel of the Nile or Romancing the Stone?
Yes.
It
Yes.
reminds me very much of Romancing the Stone, where you've got, I can't remember the actress's name, amazing actress, is playing a novelist who's out searching for this jewel. And then you've got, Michael Douglas as the like arrogant adventurer, also very cynical to the world, has kind
Right.
of a swashbuckling attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some things we can do with this character that are fun when we kind of live in that prototype. And a lot of times, Gladys, when we're doing this as authors, what we're doing is we're leaning on archetypes of personalities. Right. Like that's even when we're like, oh, this character's an Enneagram number of this way, or we could go even back to like Greek drama, like this character's playing this role. All we're doing
Right.
is taking archetypes of real people and we're being like, okay, here's the archetype I'm playing with. The nuance of the archetype comes in the character change and modulation. That's where we
Okay.
start to get like the depth of character. We
Right.
start with an archetype and then we move into depth in the like that this is how they're going to change and this is how they're going to grow. And then the second layer of depth comes with like, but I'm taking these two archetypes and I'm putting them together. Right? I'm
Right.
taking these two archetypes and I'm putting them together. So you've got this kind of self-doubting, at the same time confident in her own abilities character, who's very curious and wants to solve the puzzle. You're pairing them with this, arrogant, cynical, morally gray character. And the question the reader has is like, okay, when I put these together, what are the scenes that develop from them? Does that make
Yeah.
sense? Okay.
Yes.
So we've got him morally gray, we've got him curious, we've got him arrogant about others. Be very clear that he's arrogant about others and the world, right?
Yeah.
Because we're not saying he's arrogant about knowledge. He's curious about knowledge,
Right.
arrogant about others in the world, holds grudges, right? Somebody
Mhm.
who's arrogant about others in the world is opinionated. He's got to have a lot of opinions about
Yeah.
everything, big opinions. Um, how else, what other personality traits stand out to you when you're like, okay, I'm going to describe him in a couple words?
Um, in some ways, he's tired.
Okay.
He's not necessarily physically tired, but just kind of mentally tired of, yeah, emotionally tired.
How's that expressed?
Well, a lot of it is where he's kind of stands off from people.
Okay.
He keeps himself a lot.
Okay. So it's like like not this again.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to help you. I'm going to push you to avoid the language of standoffishness
Okay.
because you've got Sarah. We didn't use that word, but we used the word guarded.
Yeah.
So with him, we need to make sure he's tired, but not standoffish. I'd actually add this like opinionated and I'd make him aggressive with his opinions.
Oh, okay.
I'd take him in a different way because you want to contrast the two of them. If you have two guarded characters, you have a lot of scenes where nobody's talking.
Yeah.
That's not what you want. This is the
Okay.
character. You want him talking to the point of pissing her off
Okay.
until she's finally jumping into the conversation. Does that make sense?
Yes. And
Yeah.
that's how he's kind of keeping some distance there. He's just
Yeah. But rather than standing off, he's using his
right.
opinions as a wall.
Okay. Yeah.
right? He's building
Yeah.
walls with his opinions. Um, you can actually visualize him and Sarah at some point in the book having a rift between them and him saying things like, "You're just like the rest of them." Right? That's a
Yeah.
phrase of
Yeah.
like, I've built a wall. My opinion of you is proved correct. You are just like everybody else. Right? Like, you think you're
Mhm.
so much better than everybody else. Yeah.
Well, and I think I've got places in there where he thinks that
Yeah.
he needs to say it. He needs to
At a
say it though.
climactic point in their
Yeah.
relationship, he needs
Yes.
to say it. I am warning you though, if he says it and they make up, your readers are going to be like, oh, they're going to get together. Right? Like, so
Right.
yeah. Um, just because that's how we're wired with story.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
anything else about him that kind of stands out to you? Do we put his cynicism in here? We didn't put his cynicism in here. Um, cynical about things. And by cynical about things, I mean that like he always sees the worst.
Yeah.
He always sees
Yeah.
what's wrong with everything.
Okay.
Um, what else about him? Does he laugh a lot?
No,
Is he charming?
he can be,
Okay.
but he's not when he meets Sarah, he's not, but he is friends with the Stonemans. They were ones that remained friends during all of his issues.
Okay.
And so when he's talking to them, he's nice and polite and more charming anyway.
Is he bitter?
I think he's moved past the bitterness.
Okay.
He was initially, but he set up this other career.
Okay.
And so he's kind of moved on from that.
There's kind of two ways to go with a character like this. And right now you're kind of in the middle. And
Okay.
I'm gonna encourage you to push one way or another.
Yeah.
He's in the second half of his life. He's
Mhm.
moved past the wound. He thinks he's moved past the wound. He
Right.
hasn't. He's set up superficial things that are helping him
Right.
deal with the wound. But um at the same time, he's successfully built this secondary career that involves him entertaining people. So he's either going to be super grumpy, bitter, but so intelligent people listen to him all the time.
Okay.
Or he's going to be incredibly charming. And by charming people make great eye contact. They say interesting things. Um, they smile. And so when you combine charming and arrogance, you get this like person that just is very open about the fact that they just don't give a shit. Does that make
No,
sense?
yeah, it makes sense. He's the first. He's the
Bitter, grumpy. Okay,
bitter,
so not
and I
charming.
right, and I tolerate you. And he's intelligent and all that, and people put up with it.
Okay, you're going to need a third character, and I
Okay.
hate to break this to you because it's going to be a bigger ad. They need another sidekick who's positive and optimistic.
Well, that's Christopher.
Okay, and Christopher's in a lot of scenes.
Yes,
Perfect.
and from around the midpoint on, the three of them are in a lot of scenes together.
Perfect. You got to have Christopher in a ton of scenes because
Yeah.
the problem with having scenes, so I'm moving Christopher up here to a main. The problem with
Okay.
having Sarah and Thaddeus in scenes together is those scenes are going to be heavy
Right.
because
Yeah.
she's guarded and he's grumpy.
Yeah.
And so they're just not going to be fun.
Yeah.
You need somebody bringing the fun. So we'll talk about Christopher in a second. Let's build his voice together. Uh, when I go into these, when I talk about topics, language, body language, the construction of utterances, which of these in his voice is clearest to you?
Um, Probably the topics or the language,
Okay, talk to me about that.
because topics, he's only going to talk about what he needs to talk about, which is academics and in his area of specialty, because he's
Okay.
got his background is more archaeology and ancient history, where Sarah's is more medieval art. So, but she needs his expertise in order to solve the puzzle.
Okay. So he's only going to talk about places he's an expert in.
Yeah.
When she starts talking about something he doesn't care about, what does he do in your head?
He either gets quiet or he changes the conversation.
All right. Don't have him get quiet.
Okay.
You want him aggressive.
Okay.
I would even give him some phrases like, sorry, trying to color code this while we do it is probably not the best idea.
Yeah.
Like, I would give him some phrases like, come on, or this again, right? You want him using phrases that
Yeah.
kind of like belittle what other people are sharing,
Okay. Yeah.
not just her. Or like, this is the kind of like, blah, 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 and
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. Right? Like, I would
Yeah.
also have him mock others when they're talking about things that he
Okay.
doesn't like.
Okay.
Right? So, as we're building his voice, and once you took him grumpy and bitter, don't worry, nobody's going to want him and Sarah to get together. So, because he's going to be an a-hole. But so that, like, not fun mocking, but like
Yeah. Right.
arrogant mocking.
Right.
Like, oh, really? That symbol means that to you? Oh, really? That's so nice. That's so special. Can we get back to what we're talking about? Can we get back to what we're doing, please? Right? Like that kind of like aggressive, like I do not care about what you're saying.
Yeah.
How does that feel?
That that feels good. I see where I've got some rewriting to do, but it also makes a lot of sense, because one of the things he and Sarah butt heads on initially is he understands who the bad guys are and what they're after and their motive. And she's not quite seeing that yet. She's more worried about somebody else stealing her find
Hmm.
and trying. So they're coming at for, and I know I've got where he gets real frustrated with her. Don't you understand the danger you're in?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
And
Yeah.
she doesn't. So I want definitely
Yeah.
want to bring that out a lot more.
So we also need him, um, because again, part of this is like what they talk about and what they don't talk about. He needs to share all his opinions.
Okay.
He holds nothing back.
Okay.
He has an opinion about everything and he shares all of his opinions. And
Okay.
even when his opinions are what you're saying is stupid, he's going to
Okay.
share all opinions. Does that make sense? That's
Yes.
part of that arrogance you want to build in him. Arrogant people feel they're right. So they don't have any
Yeah.
problem being like, you're a dummy, right? Like that kind
Okay.
of, I wouldn't have him use the word dummy, but that kind of like,
No, but he can go on about, this is not your area of expertise. You need to
yeah,
listen to me.
yeah. I
So
would say
that,
his
yeah.
his body language needs to be explosive.
Okay.
meaning that like it changes when he shares opinions. He gets real animated.
Okay.
So most of the time you want him he's relaxed and then gets animated when he shares opinions.
Okay.
It's an it's an intimidation thing, right? When somebody starts like waving their arms when they're sharing an opinion, it's a
Yeah.
way of being like, you have to pay attention to me now. It's a way of taking up space in the world.
Yeah.
You know, if somebody's leaning back in a chair and not engaging in the conversation, or like leaning on a table with one arm
Hmm.
back in this show of like, I'm apathetic to what you're saying. And then in the heat of the discussion stands up from the chair and starts pacing and waving their arms around, and that kind of like
Okay.
explosion of movement. It's a way to take charge of the conversation. It's a power move.
Okay.
You want to give him body language power moves. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
um you're going to want to alternate the construction of his utterances. When he doesn't care, one liners.
Yeah.
When he is lecturing, long sentences
Okay.
and multiple sentences.
All right.
So when he's sharing his opinions, he has a lot to say. Otherwise,
Yeah.
he's dismissive and doesn't care. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Pacing, he's going to be active in all conversations. So unlike Sarah, he doesn't hold anything back.
Okay.
Because the problem is he's not listening to anybody.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
He starts and ends conversations.
Okay.
Um, how do you feel about that voice?
That that sounds really good. I think I'm finally starting to focus in on actually who he is. And like that one with the pacing,
Yeah.
I know I've got to change up stuff because there's a conversation with him and Sarah and Walter Stoneman, and it's mainly between Sarah and Walter. And
Yeah.
it needs to be between Thaddeus and Walter, and Sarah's kind of
Yeah. And at some point in those conversations, you want Thaddeus to piss her off.
yeah.
And like we said, in her voice, right, she holds back until something calls her into the conversation.
Right.
So he's going to piss her off, and that's when she's going to start entering. You want to gauge her entrance slowly. At
Okay.
first, she's going to say, like, well, there's other ways to see that.
Right.
And then you're going to give Thaddeus, like, other ways to see that. That's what people like you always say, other ways to see that. What you mean is
Yeah.
that you're right and you know it's right, and you don't even care about what I have to say because you have academia behind you. And she's be like, well,
Yeah.
that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you look at this paper, it would say
Yeah.
this. I don't need to look at the paper. I don't need to look at what you're saying. I've read all these things. You assume I don't know, but I know. But that's what the problem with people like you. And then that's where she needs to be like, who are you to say people like me? Right. Like, and that's when
Yeah.
now the conversation isn't about Walter at all anymore. Now it's between her and Thaddeus. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Things that you're going to have, locations for potential modulation for him. Doesn't hold back, ends conversations, and is not listening to people.
Yeah.
Um, in the change, slowing him down to listen is going to demonstrate growth,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
In a key moment, having him ask someone else's opinion,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And when it happens, everybody needs to make a big deal out of it.
Okay.
When it happens, everybody needs to be like, oh my gosh, did you just ask what I think? And he needs to be like, don't make me take it back. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
Um, and then this right here is going to be a big one. Defending someone is going to be a big deal because he's constantly mocking other people. He's pushing
Okay.
people away
Okay.
with his
Yeah.
arrogance and opinions. At some point, he's going to come to Sarah's defense and she's going to be shocked.
Okay.
And that's a moment of growth for him
Yeah.
because he's not pushing her away anymore. They're together. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about the character voice that you're missing in Christopher. Um, I'm not going to read his background. Instead, I'm going to talk to you about what you need. I don't want to do
Okay.
that to you though, because you've already written the book. So talk to me
Well,
about Christopher's personality. How does he come off to you? We don't need him to have a wound, by the way.
okay. Yeah,
He's
because he really he
he's a
does.
secondary player. He's going to be the
Yeah,
glue between these two.
right.
So
Well, and
talk to me about
actually,
his. Oh yeah, go for it. Sorry.
I was just say when Sarah and Thaddeus meet him,
Mm-hmm.
they start bonding because neither one trusts him. They're
Okay.
both suspicious of him, so that gives them that's one of the first things they have in common. Neither one of them trusts him.
Okay. What's he like that makes them not trust him?
They don't know what his motive is. He's got this one story he's telling them, but they don't know whether it's true or not.
But what's he like? How does he tell that story?
Well, he's been following Sarah from near the beginning. So
Okay.
she has seen him along. So she's kind of like, who is this? And what does he want? Um, and then he's trying to talk to her because he's after the cup that they all are, but he's with the good guys.
Okay.
But it's a secret group that nobody knows about.
Okay.
And so they need her to work with them, and she needs help.
Gotcha. Um, so that's all about his location in the story
Right.
and his relationship to them. We need to get into his personality. I'm going to make some recommendations. Are you okay if I make recommendations based on who they
Well,
are?
yeah.
You have
Yeah.
two isolated characters. You have two characters who are actually unlikable in their own ways.
Okay.
This guy needs to be charming. He
Yes.
needs to be personable. He needs to be funny. He needs to be encouraging. He needs to be definitely good looking. Um, and he needs to be one of those people that things work out for.
Okay.
So generally optimistic.
Okay.
You need a Ryan Reynolds character.
Yeah. That
Does that make sense?
makes complete sense.
Which will
Yes.
work with what you're trying to do with him because Sarah isn't going to trust him because he seems too good to be true.
Okay.
Thaddeus isn't going to trust him because he's everything Thaddeus hates about the world.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He is he represents the uh silver spoon in his in that this is how Thaddeus would describe him. Silver spoon in his mouth, everything handed to him. Elite that everybody loves even though he doesn't deserve.
Okay. Yeah.
right? That's how Thaddeus is going to
Yeah.
see him. Sarah's
Okay.
going to be like, um, you know, hasn't earned it, doesn't have the academic rigor, getting by on his looks alone. Not sure if I can actually depend on this guy. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yes.
I would have her in some ways resemble her ex-husband. Her ex-husband needs to be this type of charming life of the party.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
That's what's going to cause her to back off, is that she sees her husband in him.
Okay.
So let's talk about what that kind of character looks like. A charming character, and again, we don't need growth for him. He's the glue, right?
Yeah.
So we just need a baseline voice. You can modulate based on emotion. Like, he's going to sound a little bit different when he's scared. He's going to sound a little bit different when he's drunk, right? Like, but you don't need to like, oh, this is how his character is going to grow, because he just is there to glue these. He's the Jimmy Olsen of your Superman and Lois Lane,
Right.
right? He's just going to glue them together a
Right.
little bit. Um, so he's going to ask a ton of questions.
Okay.
He's going to assume he doesn't know, right? So you can see why you need this character, because otherwise you just have Thaddeus talking all the time.
Right.
You need somebody looking at Sarah going, Sarah, how do you feel about that? Right?
Okay.
Which makes him charming. That's what somebody who's people are charming because we feel like they care about us.
Hmm.
Charming
Yeah.
people see us. And that's
Okay.
how you need him. You need him to be seeing people, right? Like, so he's
Okay.
interested in others. And that's the topics he's going to pull out. Lots of questions he asks other people,
Okay.
right? Leads conversations with questions. Um, Probably, to keep him mysterious and untrustworthy, shares almost nothing about himself.
Okay.
You can leave a conversation with him. You can go into a conversation with him hoping to learn something about him, and leave that conversation feeling great, but realizing that you know nothing. That he has tricked you into spending the whole time talking about yourself,
Yourself. Okay.
right? He's going to
Yeah.
be a toucher. He's
Okay.
putting hands on your shoulders
Okay.
when he wants to connect with you. He's, you know, patting your hand supportively.
Okay.
All right. He's putting his arm around you. This is how charming people like this connect. But it's only he has got to have an instinct about who wants to be touched and who doesn't want to be touched.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Part of this is charming people mirror you.
Okay.
So charming people talk about what you want to talk about, use language that you use. He needs to be very affirming,
Okay.
right? So
Yeah.
anytime Sarah says something, you want him looking at her and being like, hey, that's really smart,
Okay.
right? And that makes her go like, I don't like that, right? I don't like, because somebody full of self-doubt, when you're like, that's really smart, they don't know what to do with it. They're like, I don't like it. I don't like, right? Like, that's not construction of utterances. One sentence, Lots of questions. He's not the talker. He's the one that is the glue between the two talkers.
Okay.
So you're going to give Thaddeus a paragraph of opinions, and then you're going to have Christopher go, wow, I've never heard it put that way. Right? Affirming,
Okay.
but says nothing. Does not, is it good? Is it bad? I've never heard it put that way, is one of those like affirming, but zero content.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What's fun about these kind of characters is you never know if they're hyper intelligent or really dumb. You never know. You never know if Christopher's super smart or super dumb. You'll have no clue. You won't, especially since you're not in his mind a lot.
Yeah.
Once you get in his POV, you're going to know if he's super smart or super dumb, if he recognizes the tools he's using, or if they're all just instinctual, right?
Right. Right.
But pre his POV, you're never going to know if he's just, and Thaddeus is going to assume he's an idiot,
Okay.
and Sarah's going to be super suspicious.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Pacing, he's the glue.
Yeah.
So you're going to have Thaddeus Christopher, Thaddeus Christopher, Thaddeus Christopher asking Sarah how she feels, Sarah Thaddeus.
Okay.
Christopher asking Sarah to elaborate, Sarah Thaddeus Christopher Sarah, Christopher Sarah Thaddeus Christopher. Does that make sense? Like, so
Yes.
in
Yeah.
these conversations between the three of them, Thaddeus is going to be pulling Sarah into them all the time, while also affirming Thaddeus. Thaddeus is going to be talking over everybody, and
Okay.
Sarah is going to be hesitant to jump in.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
If you can nail the voices of these three characters, the rest of the characters in the book won't matter as much.
Okay.
Yeah. How does that feel?
I do have one question
Mm-hmm.
on the topics he talks about. I can understand him not sharing anything about himself or very little, but I've also got it where because he's the member of the secret organization, he is telling them about the group and what they do and what their mission is.
Yeah.
Does that work? Because
It
it's not
does.
him.
He
Okay.
just needs to be artfully working it into the conversation.
Okay.
And
All
you
right.
want him doing it in one sentence. No big
Okay.
explanations. Just dropping sentences here and there. They may not be all
Okay.
that. Yeah, hey, they may not be all that bad. Or what's the name
Okay.
of the organization?
The keepers.
The Keepers. Yeah. Look, the Keepers, we do things because they need to be done.
Okay.
He doesn't need to explain it. He doesn't need to go into
Okay.
it. He's be like, let's not assume that the Keepers are nefarious here.
Okay.
That's all he needs to say. That's like, he doesn't need to he's not going to explain himself, because if he starts explaining himself, he's going to put himself in a fight with Thaddeus.
Okay.
So what, and even a sentence like that would likely send Thaddeus into a rant. So there is that, you want him dropping a sentence or two that shows knowledge, that reveals things, but you don't want him explaining stuff, because you've got two explainers already. A third
Okay.
explainer just becomes a weird three people all lecturing each other, right? Like,
All right.
you got to have a character that doesn't feel the need to explain himself all the time.
Okay.
Yeah. This is a great character that puts the mission first. That's this character.
Yes.
The
Yes.
character that's like, hey, I'm not here to prove that I'm smart, Sarah. I'm not here to justify my worldview, Thaddeus.
Right.
I'm here to get this crap done.
Right.
And I recognize that I need the best out of you two.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna manipulate the two. I'm gonna be the puppet master a little bit in conversations and manipulate the two of you to get the best out of both of you.
Okay.
Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah. It does. Yes,
Yeah.
that helps a lot because that is definitely who he is. I've got a mission and I'm here to get it done.
Yeah, but his weapon
And
has to be charm.
right, and that's what's been missing. So yes.
Yeah, and the reason it has to be charm is because you have two characters that are not likable. So you
Right.
have to have a very likable character. And
Yeah.
he's going to glue them. It's like Superman isn't likable because he's so morally conflicted. He's got all the power in the world and he's constantly questioning how he should use it.
Right.
Lois isn't likable because she's so dog-eared, obsessed with getting the answers, and she's a little arrogant and cocky,
Right.
right? You have to have Jimmy, and in that relationship, Jimmy is the like naive kid, like a little bumbling goofball
Yeah.
who, you know, gets Superman out of his head and makes Lois chill out, right?
Okay.
So you
Yeah.
got to have, when you have two very strong characters who are conflicted in some way, you have to have an unconflicted character who serves as the glue that these other two characters can operate under. So you've got Sarah, who's very internally conflicted and full of self-doubt, and you have Thaddeus, who's incredibly judgmental and pushing the world away.
Okay.
If you just put those two together, you get Thaddeus lecturing and Sarah sitting in silence.
Right. Right.
You've got to have that middle of the line character who understands I need both of these people, and the only way to get them to work together is to be so incredibly charming. And not
Okay.
just that, but as the trio of us go into places, if you let Sarah and Thaddeus walk into a room together, Sarah's going to disappear and Thaddeus is going to be an ass and nobody's helping them.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So you need them to walk into a place. You need Sarah to disappear. You need Thaddeus to be an ass, but you gotta have Christopher step into the middle there and be like, "Hey, listen, we really just need a little help here."
Okay.
And that's what softens the other two to like make this trio likable. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, it does.
Yeah. But because of the position you have him where he is actually mission driven and in a position of power, that's why you got to keep him mysterious.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, okay, how are you feeling?
Boy, that's a lot.
Okay.
It feels good. It feels much more defined than I've ever been able to get it. And I have some rewriting to do.
Yeah, here's how I would do with editing. I would take it a scene at a time. I would
Mhm.
know who's in this scene, right?
Okay.
Before I
Right.
edit, I would look at their voice. Be like, okay, this is the voice. This is who I know them to be. After you've done like 5 or 6 scenes, you won't need to look at the voice anymore. But for the first times
Okay.
you do it, look at the
Yeah.
voice, refresh who they are, read the scene, highlight where the voice feels off.
Okay. Yeah.
Take a
Yeah.
step back. If your entire scene is highlighted, you probably either need to add a scene, delete this scene altogether, or completely rewrite it. Then you can go to work. But you got to do the like
Right.
analytical work first of understanding what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
If you find that like, oh, there's just a couple places, then just read the scene and edit.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, it does.
Likely, just from how we tend to write, you're going to have a lot more editing up front than you do on the back end. Because
Right.
there's a really good chance you found these characters as you wrote them. So
Okay.
the more you get to the back end of the story, the more you're going to be like, okay, this feels more like these characters.
Okay. Yeah.
Also, don't feel the need to edit in order.
Okay.
A lot of times the middle can be tough to edit. Often when I'm editing a piece like this for character voices, I'll edit the introduction of each character to make sure their baseline voice is super strong. And I know the reader knows exactly who they are the first time we meet them.
Okay.
And then I'll find a scene with all three of them where they're talking about something. I'll edit those
Okay.
to make sure that I'm getting their dynamic right.
Okay. Yeah.
Then I'll go back and I'll actually do the heightened emotional moments where I need to modulate their voice.
Okay.
Once I have their introductions, times where they're together, heightened emotional moments where I have to where I have to modulate their voice, then I'm good to edit the rest of the scenes.
Yeah.
Does that
Yeah.
make sense? If I can
That
nail those, the rest of the scenes are easy.
okay.
Yeah. So, but it's whatever motivates you the most. That's what you need to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Anything else you want to talk about?
No, thank you very much. This has been extremely helpful.
Good. I'm glad. I'll hit stop and we can talk a little bit more.
Okay.